Well, first of all, good morning. It's great to be here. I want to thank Sean for inviting me to participate in this workshop. I'm mostly here to learn, but he asked me to speak at the beginning. Not sure why. I'm not an expert on smart grid. I don't do smart grid work, but maybe I have something interesting to say. I don't know. At least he thinks so. So in the program, you have my previous title, which was Imagining an Electric System Without Reserves, and I think that's an interesting sort of conceptual approach to thinking about these things. But I've sort of morphed my speech into something a little different than that, but it's related. So I'm calling it now Reengineering an Electric System. The way I came up with that is that as I was thinking about what I would say here, for some reason I hearkened back to some experience that I had almost 15 years ago in a business reengineering project for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Most reengineering projects have a very simple analytic approach. And so I wanted to sort of apply that analytic approach to smart grid and see what that would tell me. So let's, and so what I want to do actually is start out with the takeaways. So I'll give you the answers, and then we can play Jeopardy and see what the questions are. So quick takeaways. I think smart grid's suffering from a lack of a clear vision. And so I'm going to sort of put a vision out there that's a little broader than I think I've heard tend to hear in smart grid discussions. And from that vision, a couple things come from that. One is that smart grid is more about the flow of information than electricity. And also that sort of the current industry arrangements for operating the system may be more open to change than people might think. And then ending up with this concept of nested smart systems that provide a great deal of configuration, flexibility, and choice to participants in the industry, and that may actually be the greatest value of the smart grid, or so I'll try to convince you. All right, so let's get to the reengineering analysis. Very simple, straightforward. Starts out with a 2B. So in an organization, where do you want the organization to go? What do you want it to be able to do when you've finished this effort? And with respect to the smart grid, where do we want the industry to be when we've reached the smart grid? The second step is to then sit down and try to clearly define what the as is. Where are we now? And you could imagine that it would be difficult, and I think I'll argue with it, that it is difficult to come up with a 2B, but you would think that an as-is should be fairly easy. I mean, we're living in it right now, and but it can be a little tricky because we're living in it, it's hard for us to get sort of an objective view of what the as is. So that's a challenge. Now, so if you're thinking of putting the effort into a reengineering project, you're probably doing it because the 2B is quite different from the as is. If they were very similar, you wouldn't need to do it at all. So if they are different, the next step in the process is to do a gap analysis. And this is something where you fairly clearly define those differences between the two states of the world. And once you've done that, then the final step, which is a change implementation plan. So you look for the differences between them, and then you figure out what it is that you need to do to get from one state to the next state. And so in thinking about this workshop, it seems to me that this workshop is talking about the gap analysis and the change implementation plan. That is, how do we get from where we are today to where we want to be? And so let's start with the 2B. And so in one sense, we know what it is. We got a great label for it, smart grid. The problem is that it's surprisingly difficult to define what the smart grid is. Now, EIA, what we like to do is, among other things, is try to keep track of developments in the industry. And to do that, we need to be fairly clear about what we're measuring as movement. And so in trying to update some of our survey forms, we asked a contractor to go out and do some research and figure out, well, what does smart grid mean? What should we be measuring? And they came back with 23 different definitions of smart grid. So that's not really very helpful in trying to see where it is we might be going. And then DOE has spent a lot of TARP money on smart grid projects. And so they're all sort of over the map. And just to sort of organize those projects for administrative purposes, they put them into these five groups here. Now, so these are all definitely smart grid aspects of the smart grid, but this grouping doesn't really tell us much about sort of what the smart grid is. So then I decided, well, this workshop is about the smart grid. Maybe I can get some insight from that. So I looked at the workshop statement, and so there are a couple things listed in there: reducing cost of wind and solar volatility, harnessing the flexibility of building demand capacity, better pricing and demand response, and there was some mention of government policy, and I'm assuming the thought is better government policy. That would always be good. So these are all good goals, things to do. But then again, it doesn't quite tell us what is the smart grid. These are aspects of the smart grid. So then I dug a little deeper and went on to the C Cubed System Lab site and looked at some of the project descriptions, and ran across this one, entropic grid. Now, entropic, that sounds pretty ominous. And as I went through, the list here: volatile energy production, increased uncertainty of demand, cyber threats, increased dynamics and uncertainties due to new products and market participants. Those don't seem like the sort of things that, these are all aspects of the smart grid, but when you're looking at what the objective seems to be, which is mitigate volatility and ensure reliable operations, this project seems to be more about protecting the status quo than moving to some vision of the future of that sort of stuff. So anyway, I found that interesting, but not particularly helpful in getting to a 2B. So what's going on here? So to be fair, academics tend not to be advocates. That's you don't write papers, and you probably don't get funding for projects if you're going to be out there. But I think the academic work might be a little more forward-looking if there was a broader consensus on what the smart grid is. And then the last thing is that just in terms of reengineering, if you don't have a 2B, so that process, so that analytic process, if you try to do a reengineering without that, what you're going to end up is having the as-is as default point of reference, and reengineering never looks good from the as-is perspective. All right, so as is. So what is the as is? There's lots of different ways of describing what the as is. This is just be my version. So starting out, the electric industry for over 100 years has been delivering a particular product, and that product is electricity on demand. That is, you expect that you will be able to walk into a room and flick a switch and the lights are going to go on. That's a great product. It's I mean, that's, you don't even think about electricity. That, you know, a great product is one where you don't even think about it. However, the industry faces some steep challenges in trying to deliver that product. So its first problem is that we lack cost-effective storage. If we had cost-effective storage of sufficient size, there'd be no problem delivering, you know, electricity on demand. That would be a piece of cake. But we don't have that. So what does that mean? It means that we need to produce we need to produce electricity at the moment it's used. So that's kind of tough to do that. And what that means is that you always have to running generators. So that's, you know, I mean, that's 24/7, you know, and 365, and then, you know, I mean, you're always running generators. And then there's this other problem is that generators fail unexpectedly. So you got to deal with forced outages. So there's some uncertainties with respect to supply. And then we've got variability in demand. And I wanted to show a little video, well, I guess it is a video, but it's an animation. Not that you folks aren't familiar with this, but it's something we produced at EIA, so I just thought we would take a look at it. Anyway, so this is an animation of hourly demand on a daily basis. And so each frame is going to be a day. And this happens to be ISO New England for 10 months in 2011. So the dark line there is the hourly demands on that day. And of course, you can see that demand is lower at night and higher in the late afternoon. And then the shaded area is something that this line will sweep out as it moves through the year. And what that's showing is the maximum and minimum year to date for that particular hour. So we'll just run through this. And so in the winter, it popped up at the top. Once you start getting into spring, you're actually pushing the minimums. And then as you start getting into summer, you're going to really start pushing up the top in the late afternoon.
It's a 7-day cycle.
Well, yeah, and you can see we've noted weekends there because there's variability on weekends. Anyway, and let's see if I can pull this back. Anyway, so you can see the tremendous variability in demand. Anyway, I just think that's fun, so I wanted to show it. All right. The other aspect of demand is that it's not particularly responsive to market conditions. Most consumers don't have any idea about, you know, what the wholesale price of electricity is out there, or whether the system is short of supply. Now, there is demand response out there. There are people who are doing this, so it's not totally true. But for most people, it's they don't really care what's going on in the system. All right. So so we have uncertainty in supply, uncertainty in demand, and so what does the industry do to try to deal with that, to deliver what we want to deliver, which is electricity on demand? So the first thing is always have more capacity than you need, so reserves. And this applies over the whole relevant time spectrum from years to days to minutes. You always have to have more capacity because you might lose something and you don't know exactly what's happening with demand. The other thing is that the industry has entities whose job it is to make sure that on a moment-to-moment basis the supply and demand is balanced in the system, and because they're connected to other systems, they also have to add interchange into that balancing equation, which is the flow of power between systems. All right, so those are the two things that the industry needs to, or is using to try to take care of these challenges and deliver this product. All right, so if your business is to try to keep adequate reserves and control the system in the face of these uncertainties, you're not going to be too thrilled if some new technologies or business processes come in that increase those uncertainties. That makes sense. The question is there another way to organize the system? Is there a different approach to operating the system that might be friendlier to smart grid innovation and the uncertainties that come with that innovation? All right, so what's next? So what I want to do now is suggest a version of this different way of doing things. And this isn't my idea. This comes from an EPRI report. This is a year or so ago. Anyway, they had a very interesting description of smart grid, pervasively collaborative distributed intelligence. And when I looked at that, I said, wow, that's interesting. And then my second reaction is, what the hell does that mean? So I sort of understand each of the adjectives there. Where I start getting lost is the connection between those adjectives. Now, one way I try to understand this is looking about whether there's something else that we're familiar with that these adjectives might apply to. And I think the internet might be something where this would work. It's pervasive, collaboration can happen there, it's definitely distributed, and it's intelligent. And then, so connecting distributed intelligence, you've got smartphones all over the place, you've got routers and servers and all that sort of stuff. And, the system's definitely pervasive in that way. Now, thinking about the electric industry, I don't know that these, I think individually you could argue that these adjectives might apply. The electric industry is definitely pervasive. You're not going to deliver on demand, if it's not pervasive. And there's distributed aspects to it and that sort of thing. There is a collaborative element to it. I said those electric systems that are balancing supply, demand, and interchange, well, they have to collaborate on that interchange if they're going to be able to run the system properly. But I think where you run into trouble is trying to put these adjectives together, because I think, the way I look at the electric industry is it's very centralized, top-down, particularly in terms of the intelligence that's applied to the system. All right, so what does EPRI think this means? So they provided a list of benefits of this particular description. Allow direct participation in wholesale markets by customers. This is that issue about demand not responsive to markets. Accommodate all generation and storage. Enable new products and services and markets. Some of this sounds familiar from that entropic grid thing. And so, what I said about that is that, if you look at if you look at trying to do something new from the as-is state, it doesn't look so good. And this is the flip side. If you look at the reengineering from the to-be state, everything looks wonderful. So that's, I think that's just to say that what's important here is defining those states well, but then focusing on the gap analysis and the change implementation in between. Anyway, so there's some other good things here. Optimize asset utilization. Two bottom ones have to do with sort of reliability of the system, and they actually think that this 4 adjective version would do some good things with respect to that. All right, so what does this mean to me? So it means to me that might be useful to focus on electric systems as a whole instead of just smart devices or, and I'd add to that, sort of fairly narrow changes in business processes. So one way to describe the smart grid is that it's an application of microprocessor technology to whole electric systems. So why microprocessors? Well, smart grid, devices run off of microprocessors, but microprocessors have transformed numerous industries, communications, banking. As I was driving down here yesterday, I was thinking about the whole business of getting directions and how it's almost impossible to get a map these days. And the reason is, who wants a map? We don't do that anymore. Now it's true that microprocessor technology has been applied to the electric industry, and it has made, significant changes. It's fostered RTO markets and has allowed electric systems to grow, to be huge entities. But I guess my perspective is that, particularly from the customer side, we haven't seen any fundamental transformation of how the industry business works. So anyway, so one takeaway is this smart grid's more about IT and communications than electricity, or as I said before, it's more about the flow of information than electricity. All right, so what can microprocessors do? Of course, enhance speed and scope of communications. So it can provide better measurement of system element status. Electric grid is something that has, just tremendous numbers of devices on the system. Now, for decades, the industry has relied on, or I guess from looking back, you could say that the industry has suffered from a lack of information about the status, and so they had just pieces of information, and what they did with it is, through some sophisticated modeling, we're able to model the system with aptly named state estimators, and so that's worked well. This is what gives the operators of the system a view into what's going on. But with smart grid devices, we probably are going to be able to move to a measured approach from this model approach. Now, we've talked already about microprocessors, smart meters and smart appliances bringing demand to the table in terms of operations and markets, and then allowing participation by a bunch of new elements. All right, so now I want to come back to this balancing function and suggest that I think it's a function that I think people think is very technical, a lot of engineering involved in it and that sort of thing, and that's true. but I think there's more flexibility in it than people see, and so I'm going to run through a bunch of things and see if I can convince you of that fact. So first of all, this is a map of the latest map that NERC has put out of the balancing authorities in the US and Canada. The circles are balancing authorities. The lines between them are the direct interconnections, so power can flow between them. And so there are about 100 of them. And interestingly, there are some areas of the country, particularly the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic area, where there are very few balancing authorities. And there are other areas of the country, the Pacific Northwest, the Southwest, Florida, and the Gulf area here, where there are lots of balancing authorities. And so, you know, there isn't any particular magic in terms of the so technical requirements of balancing authorities that seems to fit with geography, or, you know, there's a lot of, you know, there's population density in the Northeast is a lot, so it's not, we don't have more balancing authorities when you have more load or population or something like that. It's something else that's going on there. And the other thing is the question of size. So, so PJM, which is this dot here, is about 100 times the size. That's the largest balancing authority in North America and probably the world. And it's about 100 times the size in terms of demand or capacity or whatever you want to measure it in, of some of the smaller balancing authorities out there. We have balancing authorities that are just towns or generators. So size doesn't seem to matter when it comes to balancing authorities. All right, so just to mention along that, so down here is Gainesville. So the city of Gainesville has a municipal utility, and it's its own balancing authority. So you're within a particular balancing authority here. One other example is, until last year, Disney World was its own balancing authority. So anyway, so you've got all sorts of different sizes. So there has been a trend toward consolidation. So back in 2009, about 30 balancing authorities in the Midwest consolidated into one balancing authority, the Midwest ISO. And then coming up in 2000, at least planned for 2014, the balancing authorities in this purple area, and actually these three here, 16 balancing authorities that are members of the Southwest Power Pool market are planning to merge into a single balancing authority. So that's a trend. But there also, over the last 10 years, has been sort of a proliferation of balancing authorities, particularly in this area and this area. And some of that is due to an interesting aspect of balancing authorities, and that is, so to balance, you need three things. Well, there are three things that go into the balancing equation: supply, demand, and interchange. But to balance, you only need two of them. So you don't have to have all three. And so we have distribution-only balancing authorities that have no supply, and they balance their demand by interchange, that is, power flowing in. And you've got generation-only balancing authorities that don't have any demand, and they balance their supply by interchange out of the system. So that's kind of a little weird, but they're out there. Those are legitimate balancing authorities. All right, so let's move on to something a little more bizarre. So we have this concept of dynamically controlled generation. So this is a blow-up of that map that we saw before, and you'll notice that particularly in the Pacific Northwest, but down in the Southwest too, and there are a few other places, we have these dotted lines. So those are not direct interconnections. In fact, these dotted lines sometimes go from balancing authorities are not directly interconnected. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So what is this? So we tend to think of balancing authorities as sort of these cohesive units that have you know, a set of generators within some electrically defined boundaries defined by their transmission system. But in this case, what's happening is you have a electric system, and through the magic of telecommunications, in addition to controlling the output of the generators within their particular area, they're also sending control signals to a generator that's in another person's system. And so, they basically, what they've done is by information technology, gone and plucked supply out of a different system. So that's showing that sort of the physical, what we think of as the physical boundaries of this balancing authority aren't necessarily there. All right. So the bottom line on this is that the arrangements for these balancing authorities, electric systems, all have more to do with commercial issues than with engineering or technological issues. And we can go into why people would want to be a generation-only balancing authority. It's purely a commercial reason behind that. And the same for this type of thing. All right, so if you can do that, you know, if size doesn't matter, all that other stuff doesn't matter. We talked about Disney World. Well, Disney World's sort of like a campus. How about the University of Florida? Why can't the University of Florida be a balancing authority? So here's a campus. It's a diagram out of the EPRI report. And they've got some generation. I'm sure the University of Florida has a wind turbine someplace, or you know, every school seems to have a wind turbine. And they've obviously got demand and connection to the system. And then they have this box over here, which is the master controller. So that's sort of the control room for this system. And so presumably this could be you know, one of these balancing authorities. And if you can do it at a campus level, why can't you do it at a building level? You know, you have the same sorts of things. So, you know, you could have distributed generation there or not, because you could be a distribution-only balancing authority. They even have some storage here, and then they've got their master controller, and they've added a plug-in hybrid vehicle. So that's an interesting concept there. So presumably you'd want your master controller to be deciding when to charge that car overnight. But how about during the day? So you drive the car to work and you know, park it in a parking lot, plug it in. And so why couldn't you, with the magic of telecommunications, have your home controller control the charging of that car in the parking lot? It's like dynamically controlled generation. So anyway, and maybe you'd want to do that because you know more about how you want to use that car than the utility who might be trying to control that, or the garage owner who is aggregating all those batteries and doing things with them. All right, so this suggests a somewhat different organization of the industry's operations. So this is where we get into this concept of nested smart systems that I mentioned before. So the one thing that you have to have is, so let's go back to these balancing authorities, so I talked about collaboration. So within a interconnection, so an AC interconnection, the eastern interconnection, the western interconnection, you have multiple balancing authorities that have to coordinate the operation of the system. So the question is, as long as, so in an AC interconnection, you have to cover everybody. You can't leave pieces of it off. So you have to be pervasive within the interconnection. But if you're going to do what this suggests, is chopping it up in finer degree and perhaps at different levels, you still need to have those communications between all the different pieces so that there's coordination for the whole. But what I want to suggest is that based on what we were talking about before, as long as you've got system elements that appear as supply, demand, or both interchange, a car battery would look like that, a storage would look like that, they can be flexibly incorporated into the balancing function. And so that allows you to do something that we haven't done, to a great degree yet, which is allow owners of devices or systems to choose how they're going to manage it. Now, Disney World chose how they were going to manage it. They just chose that they were going to have a balancing authority, and then for some reason they decided not to. Again, probably for commercial reasons. So you can choose to manage it yourself, like Disney World, or join a group. Disney World, I still haven't figured out which balancing authority Disney World joined, but I have my suspicions. And so imagine you having a neighborhood group, and you may think, oh well, gosh, distribution system. You've got to everybody in the neighborhood has to be part of the same thing. I'm not sure that that's true with the appropriate telecommunications and control technology. And so, you can have a neighborhood one, but if you don't like your neighbor, you don't have to have him as part of your group. He can be part of another group in the neighborhood, or he can be part of some other aggregator, or be just left to be part of the the incumbent utility in the area. Anyway, so this is to suggest, so what I see coming out of this is a tremendous amount of flexibility in how you configure the system, and also gives participants in the market, and I've been talking about users, also a great amount of choice in what they would want to do. And the truth is that most people wouldn't want to bother with any of this. They're just happy with the way, as long as the light goes on. But you could design this system in such a way that people would have choice as to which way they want to do it. And as I said, I think this may turn out to be the biggest value of the smart grid. And so we finish with coming back to the four items here. And hopefully I've given you a little better sense about what these four things are and how they might relate to each other. And so where are we?
You started a bit early.
Well, no. That's interesting that this is so fast, because when I was practicing, I actually have a encore, very short encore. But why don't we stop there here right now, and I'll ask for questions or comments. And if we have any time, I can show my other thing that I have.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, please, questions. Not too many questions, because we do want to hear this encore. So.
No, it won't take that long.
Questions?
Yes?
We hear a lot about the aging infrastructure of the grid all over the country, and I was at a hydropower conference last year where they said that, overall, there are probably several trillions of dollars worth of needed improvements in the infrastructure. How does all this, discussion about smart grid and the fact that we have an aging grid that's falling apart come together?
So here again is the question of what do we mean by grid? Because a lot of people think of grid and they think of transmission systems, and you probably would want to add distribution systems, and they may be aging more than the transmission systems. But I think that's true. That's aspects of the smart grid. But I think that may be a problem with this label that we put on it, because it focuses people on those aspects as which is that's the sort of flowing of electricity. And what I'm trying to show is that I think the smart grid is primarily someplace else. One of the questions is, once you bring demand into operations and the markets in a big way, and if we got storage and some of these other things, we don't actually know what transmission capability we need, and so. I know that the FERC chairman, before he became chairman, when he was a commissioner, he actually was arguing that we didn't need any more transmission. Now, several months before he became chairman, he changed his tune because the Obama administration was not of that view. But I still think that his thoughts there are intriguing. He was very much focused on distributed generation. So, if you have a tremendous amount of distributed generation, you don't need to be shipping things a long way. Now, the truth is that along with the distributed generation, we're building a lot of wind in far off places. And so, yeah, you're going to need transmission in certain places to do certain things. But I guess, as I'm saying, yes, the aging of the grid is a very big issue out there, as with any industry. And I guess what I would say is that are we going to, as we go about trying to address that issue, which is a real issue, are we going to do it from an as-is perspective or a to-be perspective? That is, are we going to think about how you would deal with that, how you would design that as part of us getting to this smart grid, whatever that means, as opposed to saying, oh, well, we just have to replace, the current transmission system as it is. Yes?
My perspective is not so much that the grid just doesn't work. Oh, it's not that it's aging, it's just that it was never designed to do what it's being asked to do because it evolved under a balkanized system, and now it's asked to move power all over the place. So it's not a question of age, it's a question of capacity between balancing authorities.
Well, there is. I think there is an age problem. Actually, the bulk power grid was originally designed to deal with the issue of reserves. As the system in the 60s and 70s built larger and larger generating facilities. And you needed this issue of, failing. You got to have reserves, and you got the chance that plants will fail. And as you built larger and larger plants, you needed to have bigger. You needed to build 2 nuclear plants if you're going to have to. And the way to avoid that was leaning on your neighbor. And so what you did is that the system was actually built to connect you to your neighbor, not connect you to your neighbor. And what that ended up with is that since plants don't fail that often, we had a tremendous amount of excess transmission capability that wasn't being used. It was there to provide reserves or to lower the amount of reserves that a single system had to have. And from that grew what's called economy energy trade. That is, most utilities were sort of self-sufficient, but at all times, your marginal unit is going to be different than somebody else's marginal unit, and you can save some money by trading it. So that's, that's sort of the East. The West is a different question. They had other reasons why they wanted big transmission system. But anyway, so we had.
From your model, it looked like we're going to be asking balancing authorities to do things that they haven't had to do in the past. Your example of the building level balancing authority, where somebody comes in, they plug their car in while they're working, and then they control from home when the car charges or when the car discharges.
Right.
The consequences of that decision, though, the individual's decision, it really falls on the building balancing authority to make that work.
Right.
Do we need to define what their rights and responsibilities? So I think certainly the role of balancing authority would be easier if they controlled when the car charged and when the car discharged,
Well,
rather than the owner necessarily.
For them, it might be. So absolutely, the definition. So a lot of this issue has to do with interchange, and interchange is something that has a lot of pages in the mandatory reliability standards that NERC has put up and FERC has approved. So absolutely, this nested concept. The only way it's going to work is that you have really well-defined roles and the systems behind it to communicate this. Now, I don't know exactly how this is going to work, but this is all, as I said, information technology. As long as the right people are getting the right information about what this building level guy is doing, and I'm assuming that there's going to, nested suggests to me that you're going to have several tiers of balancing entities, and as long as the right people have the information they need about sort of all the nested things sort of under them, sort of aggregate that up into a single set of supply or interchange, really. Then presumably it'll work. But your point is excellent. Yeah. All right. Who's?
Yes.
Oh, he has the mic. So.
Yes, related to the previous questions on what will the smart grid be in the future. The smart grid concepts have given some people the idea that we could in the future have a community-based power supply.
Right.
And that we will not need any more nuclear, nor coal, nor gas power plants. What do you think the technical and economical components of that vision?
So I'm not sure, but I will say that I think this particular view would support that. I don't know if that's going to work, but if it were to work, this particular nested approach, I think, would make it possible for that to happen. Yes?
There are a group of economists here, and we haven't heard the word prices very often.
Yes,
I guess my
yes.
question is,
We haven't heard other things, too. There's a
Right.
lot of other aspects to this whole thing.
right, so it seems,
Yeah, what the hell's going on here?
yeah, there's demand and control, you've got information flows, but
So-
what's the role of prices?
Right, and so David Cathan from FERC is going to talk tomorrow, and FERC has been doing a lot of things on the wholesale level with respect to how wholesale markets work, and that's, I think that'll relate to the prices thing. I was sort of staying away, seeing if I could get away with only one reference to RTOs in my speech, and I think he'll talk about that. But absolutely, yeah. I haven't been talking about prices at all. All right. Yes.
I really like your notion of introducing choices to the power to the people. I'm playing on words. So the use of information and non-Kirchhoff's technologies are useful. But I like to bring out the, as a power engineer, I like to say something about Kirchhoff's law.
Please.
We have a big.
You're trying to introduce reality into this.
We have a big boat anchor today around all of us.
Right.
The moment today I can go to eBay and download my ebook instantaneously versus having to go to the store and buy a paper copy.
Right.
The day I can buy electricity over the information highway is the day we throw that boat anchor away.
Right.
But today, the only way to transport that energy is still, unfortunately, through the trucks.
Right.
To the transmission line. So I think let's be realistic. There's certain aspect to that we're still a few time intervals away.
Yeah, I guess in saying that the smart grid has more to do with flow of information than electricity, that doesn't mean that it has nothing to do with the flow of electricity.
If I just add one more sentence and shut up, it's I think the wire, the transportation mechanism between supply and demand. We build this transportation to connect central plants to distributed loads.
Right.
As Edison
Right.
did.
Right.
And then over time, we build interconnection to do trading.
Right.
So the moment, and today we have a great transportation network at the transmission level. So any line can go out, we'll still survive. But there's one wire coming to my house. When that wire goes out, I'm dead. So this is another boat anchor that I'm really stuck on. So I just want to wrap that up.
Absolutely. All right.
Questions?
Any other questions?
Actually, one comment.
Sure.
Just about the, since we mentioned to be, so just personally, it would be that, as I was saying before, that, I'd like to see, a more sustainable energy infrastructure and one that is less damaging to the environment. I mean, I would call that the to be. So less global warming, less waste. And then the smart grid, as you say, the communications and control. Forget IT. It's control theory and information theory communications. I mean, that's...
Hey, I knew where it was coming.
Yeah, but that's that and economics, because because as you say, we don't know what the future will bring. So if a control theorist would say, "Oh, we need a bigger transmission grid," and slap it on,
right.
and we have to, basically see what the evolution will be, and that's where the economics comes in. But I think to be really, I think that the smart grid really is the enabling technology for a sustainable future.
Right.
I mean, just want to make sure you agree with that.
Yeah. So, do I have time to show my little
absolutely.
thing? All right. So I had this thing about no reserves, and and I was thinking. So this is the extreme to be, and I was thinking people looking at that and saying, first of all, what the hell does that have to do with smart grid? And then the second is that guy crazy? I mean, how you doing now? So it's a trick. I mean, so the trick is that I do think that a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of the smart grid could help quite a bit with respect to lessening the need for reserves. But the key is going back to that first challenge that the industry have, which is lack of cost-effective storage. So you need storage. Okay. So anyway, I wanted to show, I'm from EIA, so data, is important. So I wanted to show this. And this will end with a little advertisement. See if you're interested. So anyway, so this is, of course, EIA. This is actually FERC data. So this is hourly load for the lower 48 states in 2011. So there's a data point in the blue for every hour of the year. And you can see the things that we were talking about before. You know, there's demand is higher in the summer and lower in the spring and the fall. And then you'll see the jagged aspect of that. That's your weekends coming into play. And so you can imagine different versions of storage. Okay, so we saw the animation. The animation showed a day, and you had lower at night, higher during the day. And if you had storage that could take care of that for that day, then you'd only need the average amount of generation for that day instead of the maximum for that day. So for this, I said, well, what would that look like? So my yellow area here is just taking the average for each day and charting that. And what you can see is that the average, the highest average, is obviously the same as the highest hourly, but it's a heck of a lot lower. It's actually 130 gigawatts lower. So that's a huge amount of capacity. That's more than the whole nuclear fleet of the country. And then, you know, if you did weekly, if you were able to get, you know, even better storage where you could handle the weekends and the weekdays, you get down to the green line, which you probably can't see very well, and that would chop off another 41 gigawatts. And if you had the super duper storage where you could do your seasonal stuff, you could get to this red line, which is the average throughout the year, and chop off another 119 gigawatts. So you're talking about, you know, potentially 290 gigawatts out of this maximum of the year, which is almost 750. Anyway, so that's just trying to use data to show something. So my advertisement is that the EIA is going to be putting out a proposal in the next couple weeks, a Federal Register notice, for a new collection of information. And it's going to be collected from balancing authorities. And it's going to collect hourly data on supply, net generation, demand, day-ahead forecast, and interchange with each interconnected balancing authority on an hourly basis, and collect it the next day. So the 714 has this hourly demand data, but you had to wait till August of this year to get the 2011. So this would be a little sooner. And so I'm just sort of putting that out there to see if that might be that information might be interesting to researchers, because a lot of the smart grid types of things relate to the variability of demand on the system. So if you are interested in that, I would invite you to let us know. As you can imagine, the industry is not particularly happy about it. So, yes?
Interesting. Could you elaborate on the forecast, day-ahead forecast? Who provides the forecast? The system operator or the commercial operator?
Well, that's a good question, and that's going to depend upon which system you're talking about. Yes.
Comment about the value of storage. I
Yes.
think it's been grossly exaggerated.
Mm-hmm.
Because some discussion going on.
Mhm. That's a good point.
And basically, why do we have storage? It's to do with the first part of the presentation, which is about balance. And again, the question of balancing has been grossly exaggerated. It's not a challenge. I mean, if I may make a pitch for my presentation later on, I'll be talking to you what is the real challenge. I mean, the balancing is not really a technical challenge.
Right.
It's just an economic challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Basically,
I agree with that.
It's quite simple. That's why everyone is talking about balancing, because it's easy to get their heads around it. Basically, the wind can die out any time, so you need something to back it up.
Mm-hmm.
But we know how to do it, and we've been known, and we've been doing it for about 100 years. There's
Right.
absolutely nothing new about it.
Mhm.
And there are four ways of balancing. One is keeping a power station. It will be open cycle gas turbines or diesel engines, and basically they could come up whenever they're needed. Second is storage, horrendously expensive. Third one is the customer demand, and the fourth one is interconnection. If you interconnect everything with everything else, then basically you get smoothing of demand and smoothing of everything. It's very easy. The question is, what is the best choice? It's just an economic question. What is the trade-off between those different technologies? And you can ensure it. Storage is the most expensive one, and it will be the most expensive
Right.
one for a long time to come. I've been involved in a number of, actually, I'm at the moment seconded to the Department of Energy and Climate Change in London, and the department thought that the balancing is the main challenge for integration of renewables in the system. And there was a study, it was shown that there's a number of ways of doing it, and storage is just one of them.
Right. Right.
And it's for foreseeable future, I don't see a value for storage unless the cost will come down very dramatically from it is. And of course, the driver for that would be electric vehicles if they happen.
Right.
It's due to the.
Right.
Also, as a part of that project, we've done evaluation of the pumped storage. There's the largest pumped storage plant in England is in a place called Dinorwick in Wales, which was built in the 50s or 60s, sorry. And there was different era. And now we've done economic evaluation of that. It wouldn't be built.
Right.
Because it basically is far too expensive. If you did the proper economic analysis of that, it wouldn't be built.
Right.
Basically built on the economic principles. So I repeat, storage is grossly exaggerated.
Right.
The value of storage is grossly exaggerated.
So I want to thank you for your comments, because actually you're helping me out in my arguments before, where I was saying that the balancing function is more a commercial issue than a technological issue, and so.
And we know how we do it.
Right.
How to do it.
Right.
It's not a challenge.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
I just wanted to add one other factoid that shocked me. It won't shock you since you generated the data, and that is that there will be no electricity demand growth over the next 12 or 13 years in the U.S. And overlaying that on this, maybe regional differentials, but the forecast is for minimal. I mean, less than 0.5%. Does that? I mean, how does that affect what you're talking about?
Well,
here?
I guess what I would say is that the problem with this is historical data in the as-is world, and once you bring demand to the table in a big way, if you do, and distributed generation, I mean the whole mix, who knows what this is going to look like? I think it's probably going to be a lot narrower than it is, but I don't know. Well, that's part of the interesting thing, and that's why it's tremendously important. I talked about how EIA wants to track, track developments toward the smart grid. And, we're collecting installations of smart meters, which is the typical thing that people want to do. Oh, that's telling us we're getting more to the smart grid. I think a very interesting metric would be to see what happens to this demand curve over time, because that's really where you're going to start seeing the changes in this. Yeah.
So I guess, yes, it's in that case,